Hi everybody, welcome back to our channel, and in this tutorial today we will be looking specifically at DaVinci Resolve and qualifying and power windows and how these can be incredibly powerful for our grading needs when we're looking at grading footage. And we're going to jump straight in. So getting started, you may remember if you've seen one of the previous videos, which we'll leave a link in the description below too, that we had just gone through and graded a load of images, and this one particularly we were doing where we were going through the grading process. Now let's say we've achieved this position so far and we've got to where we need to be and we're happy with our image pretty much. However, we feel there's a couple of things that we could do to enhance it. So for example, this image is obviously very green. There's a lot of greenery around in the trees and the grass, but let's say the green in the trees is just right, but the grass could do with some life. Let's say we're going to try and change the color of the grass, make it a little more green, and see if we can do something with that. So how do we go about doing that? Now, in a lot of clips, it will be quite easy. This is actually going to be quite tricky in this particular clip because we're going to use a qualifier. So we're going to use color to determine where we are looking and where we're isolating. So let's do that now. And the first thing we're going to do actually is we're going to go back to the very first node that we went to, and we're going to use, we're going to do it here on the saturation node, and we're going to create what's called a parallel node. Now what this will do is essentially allow us to do this isolation a little bit further up the chain of grading, and it will mean that we won't have any elements from these nodes affecting our key, which is sometimes quite important, and that's the best thing to do. So often it's better to do these isolations quite early on, just so that, especially if you get issues, you can do them later on, but if you get those issues, as I say, with the key not being quite accurate enough because it's taking into account all the other grades, particularly if you have a look grade, so maybe a very cool or very warm kind of stylistic grade in one of those nodes, you'll want to make sure you do it at a point so it's not going to consider that node in the key. Okay. So we've created our parallel node, and as you can see, we're going to create the parallel node here. So this node, we're going to change the label on, and we're going to just call it grass. Okay, for now. So we were doing the grass. Now what we're going to do is from here, we are going to make a qualification. So to do that, you come down to the little dropper. Once you've got the qualifier window open down here, you basically will see the dropper icon when you come up to the viewer. And what we need to do is essentially select the grass. So we are going to find a nice bit of green grass. We're going to click it and just drag a little bit. There we go. And you won't notice anything majorly different has happened, apart from if you look in the qualifier window, you'll see we've actually made a selection. So these are the pixels that we sort of dragged over just then, and that's what it selected and said, these are the bits we think you want to select. And you'll notice this thumbnail has changed, but you won't see any major difference to the viewer unless you go up here to the highlight icon. You can also press Shift H on the keyboard, and what that will do is it will show you now which areas of the image we've selected. So as you can see, all of the bits that we can see in green are selected, and everything in grey is not selected. So great, we've made a selection, but the problem with that is we've got too much of the selection. We've got too much of the trees. We've got actually a little bit of this guy's jumper here, a little bit of this sort of browny bit underneath, and not enough of just the grass by itself and the green colours in the grass. So we need to further qualify this, and we can do so by coming down to the qualifier, and we can change the center position of our selection here by doing that, and we can change the width, maybe narrow it in and not select quite so many of the sort of the sort of brown tones there. So let's bring it in a bit, but obviously as you see, we're actually losing a lot of our image. So again, difficult grades, difficult clips like this, you may have to use a slightly different method, and that's not too bad there. We've got a relatively good selection on the grass, so it's worth just bearing that in mind. We might be able to change that with saturation, bring a little bit more saturation in. We've lost it, so no, that's not going to help. So you have to have a little bit of a refinement, a little bit of a fiddle with these lower ones, just to see if we can. There we go. We can actually remove some of the trees doing that, and we've got a bit more of the grass here. Okay, so that's starting to get better. That's starting to get better, and it's always worth, once you've done this little element of refining, just to use a little bit of blur radius down here, just to give yourself a little bit of a softening on that grade itself. So you can see if I keep going all the way, you can see how it's sort of softening the edges of that feather of that selection, and maybe we just soften that up enough just to help it blend a little bit better. Now that in itself isn't too bad of a selection. It's not too bad. If you notice what bits that we're not selecting down here, then the more of the yellows and what have you. And you could further qualify that and pick up the greens. But for now, let's say we're done. We've picked up our greens, and that's very good initially. So turn that off. Now, obviously, we've got that green selected grass. We can actually now make changes to how it looks in exposure, in its saturation, and in color. So we can actually, for example, if we want to come across here and make it greener by increasing the saturation, and you'll see it's got all of a sudden it's full of life, and I've desaturated it, and now the colors come back. So we can do that. So I'm just going to set that back to 50, which is where it's defaulted to. Or we could change the color. So normally I would go into, say, the offset and drag that, and we can change the color of that grass to something quite dramatic. Or in this instance, we could make it greener. So let's say that was maybe a little bit too much. But this is the great thing. If we go to this green here, and let's say we want a real nice bright color green here, a bit too much perhaps. One of the great things about Resolve is it has this key function down here. If you go to the keyer, you can use the key output, and you can actually soften off the actual overall key, and in itself that actually softens off the grade. So I can just gently bring it back to dial to taste, and let's say that's where I want to leave it. So now we've got a situation where we've actually graded it, and we've made a selection, and look at that, we've made a real improvement in that grass color, and obviously when you go through it will work through quite nicely. So those greens have really been picked up. Now that's a qualifier, but you may have also noticed that when we had the highlight window selected, we'd also got a few of the tones up here, and they'd also been affected. Now, in this instance, there's not too many of them that we'd necessarily worry about it, because you're only looking at the edge of what is already a green tree anyway. But let's just, for example's sake, say we'd really boosted this grass up into a completely different colour. We haven't dialed off the key, so it's a lovely pink grass now. But you can see how this pink tinge of colour is affecting the trees up here. Now we obviously don't want that to happen, and if that's the case, we need to find out a way of isolating just this bottom section of the colours that we've selected, and that's where the power windows come in. So what we're going to do is go to our window option down here, and you'll see that you've got a bunch of windows already set up by default on this particular node, and the one we're going to look at using today is the linear one. So we're just going to click on that, and that will bring it up in the viewer. And as you'll notice, the effect of the pink grass that we've created is now limited to just what's inside the box, which is very good. So obviously if we bring it up here, you'll see that that pink tinge is on the trees. If we bring it down here, it's on the grass, but now not on the trees. And this is the key that's going to help us isolate the grass and not the tree colors. Okay, so what we will now do is essentially we need to track this clip, and we need to stick this box to the footage. Now, there's a couple of ways that we would go about doing this initially. And the first of all is we are going to position our window on the bit that we want to track in our footage. So let's track this tree. So we're going to track the tree. We're going to sort of limit that tracking window a little bit so it's not too big. And that's what we're going to track initially. So going over to the tracker, you then see that this is the basic tracker window here. You have pan, tilt, zoom, rotate, and perspective 3D are the things that it's going to start tracking on that clip. And usually I would have a go tracking everything with all of these on first, and then if we didn't get the result that we wanted, I would take some of these off and work backwards until I got the desired result. And in most cases it works really well. This is actually a relatively tricky clip to track, as we've got some rotation, a dolly movement, and so there's a bit of zoom and a bit of rotation and a bit of perspective all going on at the same time. And I've tried it a few different ways actually, and then I found that one of the ways that we tried out that worked best was to remove the perspective 3D and the zoom and the rotate, and just keep it to a pan and tilt. So anyway, what I'm going to do, I'm going to run it through as is right now to show you how it all kind of works. So we track forward from the beginning frame of our clip, and you'll notice all of the track points that DaVinci Resolve is put in order to help us track this particular clip. And we're just going to leave you for a sec while this does this, and the power of edited video, we will come back once it is complete. Okay, great. So that is our track completed, and you'll notice that now that box sticks to the tracked tree that we've tracked there. Okay, so that all works quite nicely. And what you will have noticed is that the actual effect, the pink effect, is now limited, as I say, to it being inside the box. So one of the things we're going to need to do now is exclude, I should say invert that actual window, so that we end up with the opposite happening, where the inside of the box is not affected and the outside is affected. So as you'll see, that's just turned back, given us back our pink grass, and everywhere in the box is not being affected at all, which is really good. So that's absolutely what we want to see. Now obviously this box is not actually in the right place itself, so what we need to do is just reposition the box that we're using here. So we can actually now reposition it ever so slightly. Okay, and there we go. And as you can see there, quite easily, everything that's inside the box is not being affected by the color. Everything outside the box is being affected by the color, which is just what we want. We wanted the grass selected. We didn't want the green tree selected and the leaves in the tree selected. So that's worked for us just as we wanted. And obviously this element of this grass area here is obviously very brown, not so much green involved there. So obviously that would require another qualification in order to sort of smooth that out. And please do bear in mind, this is quite a quick tutorial for something that is quite an advanced and intense technique really. But great, so obviously that has worked really well. We've got the isolation that we wanted. We've got all the grass selected that we needed to be selected. As I say, you can actually do a small little adjustments to those just to make sure everything that should be selected is. There we go. And yeah, as you see, it's all looking really, really good. And obviously that if that window gets in the way from seeing things, if you come to this icon, turn it off, you can get a better view of what you're looking at. So let's just go back to the idea of this being actually not pink grass, but being green grass. We can obviously come still back down here and we can dial it back to the color that we need, so that if we reset that color, that will be sort of where we'd originally graded it to. And let's just say we want to green that grass up. And obviously this will be a little bit more subtle, in as much as obviously the pink showed up very clearly where we were, you know, the key showed up very clearly, but here, because we've got a blend of colors that are very close to one another, just this little change of color to make the grass look a little greener, maybe saturate it. Obviously we could saturate it more if we wanted to, so we really get the grass going sort of nuclear green. But again, this is the great thing, the power of how much control you have in this one application is incredible. And then from here, if you wanted to, we could pop back and continue editing and adding to our footage and to our project. So there we are, that's it. Qualifiers, Power Windows, incredibly powerful within DaVinci Resolve. And I know you'll have a lot of fun playing with this feature and using it to great effect in your projects. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give us a like, everybody, and a subscription would be incredibly gratefully appreciated. Obviously, you'll have access to all new content as we release it. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye for now.